again, and welcome to another time of meditating on the person and work of Jesus Christ. These short videos are a follow-up to my sermon from Pat this last Sunday, where we saw the importance of thinking deeply about who Jesus is and what he has done as a way to encourage us to hold fast to our confession and a way to invite us to draw near to Christ. That sermon came from Hebrews chapter 4, and these follow-up videos have been guided by the chapter titles of a book by Alistair Begg and Sinclair Ferguson called Name Above All Names. And these last 2 days, we have thought about Jesus as a prophet and Jesus as priest. And today we turn to the third and final office, one of those anointed offices in Israel, and that is the office of king. Jesus is the conquering king. At his birth, the wise men who came looking for Jesus, they came to Herod and they said, "We are looking for this child who has been born King of the Jews." And throughout the Old Testament, we see this king prophesied, this one who would come and he would reign on the throne of David forever. And when Jesus came, one of the first things he did was announce that he was that king, and that with his coming, he was ushering in the kingdom of God. But his kingdom and his kingship was very different than what the people of Israel were expecting. Throughout his ministry, time and time again, he refused and turned away the desires of the people to establish an earthly kingdom with military might and political power. At his trial, he told Pilate that his kingship was not of this world. He said, "If my kingship were of this world, my servants would fight, that I might not be handed over to the Jews. But my kingship is not of this world." However, he was the prophesied king of Israel. That's why at his triumphal entry, as he rode into Jerusalem on the back of the donkey, he did not rebuke his disciples when they cried out, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord." He was that king. But he was a king who was coming not to conquer through military might and power, but he was coming as a king who would come and lay down his life for his subjects. A king who would suffer and die. But Colossians 2 tells us that it's in that very death that his conquering actually took place. Verses 13 through 15 of Colossians chapter 2 says, "And you, who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh." But God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses, by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. You hear that language of triumphing over the rulers and authorities. It's in his death that this conquering king has triumphed. Because not only did he die, but he rose from the dead. And then he ascended, and as Ephesians 1 says, when he ascended, God seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion, and above every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in the one to come. And he put all things under his feet and gave him as head over all things to the church. This is who Jesus is. This is where he is. He is ruler of all. You know, often when we talk about Jesus as king, we often put it in terms of a question, as in, is he your king? But that's not really an accurate question, because we see from that verses from Ephesians 1 that I just read, and from other places, that whether we admit it or not, Jesus is king. God has made him king. The question for us really is, what is our relationship to this king? Are we joyful subjects of this king, or are we rebellious enemies? One day, as Philippians 2 tells us, every knee will bow to Jesus, and everyone will acknowledge him and submit to him as king. Some will submit to him as citizens of heaven. Others will submit to his judgment and in banishment to hell. One day we will not be able to ignore the reality of Christ's kingship. The question for us is, will we acknowledge it today? In the Westminster Shorter Catechism, the question is asked, how does Christ execute the office or ministry of a king? And here's the answer: in subduing us to himself, in ruling and defending us, and in restraining and conquering all his and our enemies. That'd be a great thing for you to meditate on today as you want to think about Christ as king. How does Christ show his kingship? How does he execute his kingship? By subduing us to himself, by ruling and defending us, and in restraining and conquering all his and our enemies. I love that description. He subdues us to himself. Now, if we're honest, we know that sometimes can be painful because we have parts of us that want to rebel against him that need to be subdued. And sometimes that comes through discipline. But like any good medicine, the result of his discipline is healing and health. I love that he rules and defends us. And he restrains and conquers all his and all of our enemies. This is true. Though we might not see it fully or understand how it is playing out in the world around us, this is true. But notice in that answer that the restraining and conquering are put in the present tense. They're not completed. They are happening in an ongoing way. He is currently restraining and currently conquering. One day they will be in the past. One day they will be restrained and conquered. And we're moving towards that day. Hebrews 10:12-13 says, "But when Christ had offered for all time a single sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God." And notice this, waiting from that time until his enemies should be made a footstool for his feet. That will happen. His enemies will be made a footstool for his feet. They will be restrained. They will be conquered. But right now, they are in the restraining and conquering place. Right now, that's the process is happening that will one day be completed. One day we will gather around the throne of Jesus and with the throng surrounding him, join our voices to the chorus and acknowledge and celebrate Jesus as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. But today, knowing that that day is coming, we can live trusting that Jesus is King. The world is not spinning out of control. Your life is not tumbling out of control. He is on the throne. He is King. Take some time today to think deeply about Jesus Christ as King. Jesus Christ.